Guinea-Sierra Leone border dispute over Yenga, a recurring threat to West African peace and integration. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where truth meets courage and Africa speaks boldly. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. In today's deep dive video, we uncover a story that's shaking the borders of West Africa, the Yenga conflict, where Guinean troops have reignited an old dispute with Sierra Leone, triggering fear, displacement, and diplomatic tension. But what lies beneath the headlines? What's at stake for the region and for Africa's future? Stay tuned for a powerful analysis you won't find anywhere else. The long-standing border dispute between Sierra Leone and Guinea over the village of Yenga has once again erupted into a regional flashpoint. The April 28, 2025 incursion by Guinean troops into Sokoma and their aggressive posture near Yenga has reignited tensions, displaced civilians, and exposed the fragility of sub-regional diplomatic mechanisms. This video offers a critical analysis, Africa-wide comparison, and a forward-looking assessment of the current crisis, while integrating the latest developments and official government responses. Legacy of a civil war and a broken promise. The Yenga conflict dates back to the late 1990s and early 2000s during Sierra Leone's brutal civil war. In an effort to fortify its porous eastern border, the government in Freetown invited Guinean troops to assist in counterinsurgency operations, particularly against the Revolutionary United Front, RUF. Guinean forces entered Yenga and surrounding areas as allies, but post-war, they did not fully withdraw, creating a persistent sovereignty vacuum and sparking multiple diplomatic incidents. As Sierra Leone transitioned to peace, its repeated demands for Guinean withdrawal yielded vague promises but no firm action. According to Sierra Leone's Foreign Minister, Timothy Musa Kaba, every time we engage in dialogue at the highest level, they agree to leave. But once the diplomats return to their capitals, they come back. Radio France Internationale, April 30th, 2025. A renewed threat to peace. On April 28, 2025, Guinean soldiers fired 3 warning shots in the air while attempting to assert military presence in Sokoma, a border village near Yenga in the Kailahun district. Panic spread quickly, and civilians fled toward Koindu, fearing for their lives. Resident Daniel Makundu told RFI, "We heard 3 gunshots. People got scared and fled towards Koindu. The next day, the Guinean military prevented any return to Yenga." In response, the Sierra Leonean government deployed troops to stabilize the area, distributed humanitarian aid to displaced families, and activated diplomatic channels at the regional and international level. A pattern of border militarization. Yenga is not unique. Across the continent, militarized border disputes continue to pose serious threats to regional peace and cooperation. Key examples include Ethiopia-Eritrea. Their decades-long conflict over Badme escalated into full-scale war and was only resolved under the 2018 peace accord. Nigeria-Cameroon, Bakassi Peninsula. Despite the ICJ ruling in 2002 granting Bakassi to Cameroon, implementation faced stiff resistance, highlighting the limits of international adjudication without political will. Sudan-South Sudan, Abyei region. Despite UN peacekeeping deployments, the dispute over Abyei remains unresolved, with oil and ethnicity at the heart of the crisis. What these cases share with Yenga is the intersection of post-conflict fragility, economic interest, often minerals or oil, and weak institutional enforcement of territorial agreements. Implications for Sierra Leone and regional security. 1. Local impact. The most immediate victims are the displaced residents of Sokoma, Koindu, and Yenga, who face loss of farmland, livelihood disruptions, and security threats. Women, who previously thrived through cross-border markets, have been economically stranded. Children are unable to access education due to the insecurity. Reports of sexual harassment and abuse have emerged from these displacement zones. Ministry of Information and Civic Education, May 2025. 2. Diplomatic fallout. Sierra Leone has now escalated the matter to multiple bodies. ECOWAS. A communique has been submitted requesting formal arbitration under the West African Peace and Security Framework. African Union, AU. Sierra Leone has called for urgent diplomatic engagement to prevent further military buildup. United Nations, Ambassador Michael Imran Kanu, Sierra Leone's permanent representative to the UN, has officially briefed the UN Secretary-General and the UN Security Council, calling for international pressure on Guinea to respect Sierra Leone's sovereignty. Ministry of Foreign Affairs, May 2025. 3. Strategic risks. The Makona River region, which runs through Yenga, is rich in diamonds and strategic for trade and water resources. Any protracted military tension could jeopardize mining operations, destabilize the border economy, and invite non-state armed actors, including traffickers and smugglers. 4. Test for ECOWAS and the AU. This border dispute is emerging at a time when ECOWAS credibility is under strain, following military takeovers in Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Niger. The bloc's failure to mediate Yenga successfully would further undermine its conflict resolution legitimacy. Forward-looking approach. What should be done? Short-term actions. 1. Neutral third-party investigation. ECOWAS and AU should jointly dispatch a fact-finding mission to Sokoma and Yenga with observers from the UN Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, DPPA. 2. Military de-escalation. Both sides must commit to a demilitarized buffer zone enforced by a joint monitoring committee and possibly African Union border forces until a final agreement is reached. 3. Humanitarian relief. Immediate funding from UN OCHA and regional NGOs should be mobilized to provide temporary shelters, food, water, and psychosocial support for displaced persons. Medium to long-term solutions. 1. Formal border demarcation. Sierra Leone and Guinea must return to the African Union Border Program, AUBP, to establish legal, surveyed, and marked boundaries, eliminating gray zones. 2. Cross-border economic agreement. A bilateral economic accord that allows joint management of trade zones, mineral resources, and agriculture could defuse tensions and incentivize cooperation. 3. Institutionalizing regional arbitration. The Yenga crisis highlights the urgent need to strengthen the ECOWAS Court of Justice and the African Union Peace and Security Council, PSC, as swift, enforceable arbitration bodies for intra-African disputes, a test of sovereignty, governance, and regional integrity. The Yenga dispute has exposed more than a territorial misunderstanding. It has revealed the fragility of post-war peacebuilding, the limits of ECOWAS enforcement, and the urgency of border governance reform in Africa. Guinea's continued military presence in a foreign territory, decades after a wartime alliance ended, reflects a pattern of creeping expansionism seen in other parts of Africa. If Sierra Leone's international pressure strategy, through the UN, AU, and ECOWAS, fails to yield tangible Guinean withdrawal, the risk of full-scale militarization will grow. Moreover, regional stability will be further compromised, undermining the dream of African continental integration under the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA. Historical agreements, a broken chain of commitments. To understand the persistence of the Yenga dispute, it is crucial to examine the timeline of official agreements and public declarations between Guinea and Sierra Leone. Several joint communiques and high-level meetings have promised resolution, yet the pattern of Guinean reoccupation after diplomatic engagement has become routine. Key milestones: 2002. Banjul meeting, post-Civil War. Guinea and Sierra Leone agreed in principle to a gradual withdrawal of Guinean forces from Yenga. 2005, Joint Communiqué. Both nations pledged to respect territorial integrity, but Guinea sought access rights to the Makona River for fishing and military patrols, points that remained ambiguous. 2012, High-Level Bilateral Commission, Sierra Leone's then-President Ernest Bai Koroma and Guinea's President Alpha Condé issued a joint press statement reaffirming that Yenga belongs to Sierra Leone. However, implementation was never completed. 2021 follow-up delegations. Despite renewed diplomatic overtures, satellite imagery and field reports indicated new Guinean checkpoints being erected. The recurring theme is clear. Formal agreements lack enforcement mechanisms, and there are no credible penalties for non-compliance. Yenga's strategic value, more than just a village. Yenga is a geostrategic hotspot located on the banks of the Makona River, which serves as a natural boundary and vital economic artery between the two nations. The surrounding area is rich in alluvial diamonds and gold, attracting artisanal and semi-industrial mining interests. Agricultural swamplands used for rice farming and palm cultivation. Fishing zones critical to local food security. Trade corridors linking Sierra Leone's eastern province to Guinea's Nzerekore region. Guinea's continued presence appears to be economically motivated. Analysts suspect that Guinean soldiers or affiliated networks may be benefiting from illicit mining and cross-border trade tariffs, fueling reluctance to withdraw. According to a confidential UN report 2024 on West African border tensions, Yenga functions as an informal revenue zone for unauthorized actors, with both state and non-state interests intertwined in its mineral trade. This raises the possibility that institutional corruption and informal economies may be playing a hidden role in sustaining the dispute. Voices from the ground, the forgotten casualties of diplomacy. While ministers exchange letters and delegations meet in air-conditioned rooms, the people of Sokoma, Koindu, and Yenga continue to suffer. Displacement has fractured families and torn apart livelihoods. Women and children in crisis. The closure of the Koindu cross-border market, once a vibrant hub for trade in rice, palm oil, vegetables, and textiles, has crippled local commerce. Female traders who relied on daily crossings into Guinea now face destitution. A joint assessment by Women's Advocacy Network, WAN, and UN Women Sierra Leone in May 2025 found that 67% of displaced women had lost their primary income source. 28% of girls in the area had dropped out of school due to insecurity. Reports of gender-based violence, including harassment by border patrols, were rising. Local activist Hawanatu Fofana remarked, "We are not interested in who owns Yenga. We just want peace, security, and our market back. Our children are suffering because grown men with guns can't resolve a problem from 20 years ago." ECOWAS and AU at a crossroads. Can regional bodies reclaim their relevance? The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is confronting a crisis of legitimacy. After successive military coups in Guinea, 2021, Mali, 2021, Burkina Faso, 2022, and Niger, 2023, the regional bloc is struggling to enforce democratic norms or resolve interstate tensions. In a communiqué dated May 2, 2025, Sierra Leone formally petitioned ECOWAS to establish a conflict resolution panel on Yenga, send a technical border verification team, impose diplomatic pressure on Guinea to honor past agreements. Similarly, the African Union Peace and Security Council, AUPSC, has been asked to urgently convene a session on the matter, with Sierra Leone lobbying for a formal AU resolution affirming its territorial claim. But the question remains, will these institutions act, or will Yenga be added to the growing list of frozen conflicts on the continent? The role of international law. Next stop, The Hague. Minister Timothy Musa Kaba has indicated that Sierra Leone may escalate the matter to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, if Guinea fails to cooperate. Legal analysts note that Sierra Leone has a strong case based on historical colonial boundaries, which placed Yenga firmly within Sierra Leone, as per British-French border demarcations. Doctrines of international law regarding post-conflict withdrawal, and the inadmissibility of acquiring territory by force. Customary international practice as seen in the ICJ's 2002 Bakassi ruling, where Nigeria was required to cede the peninsula to Cameroon. However, initiating a legal case is lengthy and expensive, and Guinea's military-backed transitional government may ignore ICJ rulings, especially if no enforcement mechanism is in place. A conflict with regional ripples. The renewed Yenga standoff is more than a border skirmish. It is a litmus test for peace enforcement, economic justice, and regional cooperation in West Africa. The decisions taken or not taken by ECOWAS, AU, and the UN in the coming months will reverberate far beyond the Makona River. If this dispute is mishandled again, it could serve as a dangerous precedent for other simmering territorial claims across Africa, from the DRC-Uganda border zones to the Kenya-Somalia maritime dispute, and even Morocco-Western Sahara. The Guinean political landscape, how junta rule shapes foreign aggression. To fully understand Guinea's behavior in the Yenga conflict, one must analyze the internal political dynamics of the country. Following the September 2021 coup d'etat, which deposed President Alpha Condé, Guinea has been under the control of a military junta, the Comité National du Rassemblement pour le Développement, CNRD, led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya. Initially welcomed by some Guineans for promising a break from autocratic rule, the junta has since delayed transition timelines, despite pressure from ECOWAS, cracked down on dissent, media, and civil society, focused heavily on military consolidation of power, both internally and along its borders. This domestic military entrenchment may explain Guinea's renewed assertiveness in contested peripheries like Yenga. The junta's occupation serves three key strategic purposes. 1. Territorial signaling to domestic constituencies to appear strong and nationalistic. 2. Control over natural resources, especially diamonds and gold, to sustain parallel revenues. 3. Distraction from internal economic hardship and criticism of junta governance. West African political analysts such as Dr. Aissata Barry of the Guinea Institute for Democratic Transition, GIDT, argue the junta's grip on Yenga is not just about geography, it's about legitimacy. Holding ground in Yenga projects military strength to Guineans and shifts the spotlight from broken reform promises. This dynamic introduces a complicating variable. Resolving the Yenga issue may require not just diplomatic engagement, but broader regional action to restore democratic governance in Guinea. The UN's response, symbolic or substantive. Sierra Leone's escalation of the dispute to the United Nations reflects growing frustration with the ineffectiveness of regional diplomacy. In May 2025, Ambassador Michael Imran Kanu formally briefed the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and the UN Security Council, calling for a special envoy to mediate the dispute, international pressure on Guinea to comply with bilateral and regional agreements, deployment of UN observers to document human rights and security conditions in the contested zone. While the UN's Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, DPPA, acknowledged receipt of Sierra Leone's petition, there has been no immediate movement on establishing a conflict monitoring mechanism. Critics point to the UN's overstretched capacity and geopolitical prioritization of conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, and the Sahel. However, former UN diplomat Ibrahim Conte warns against underestimating the Yenga crisis. Ignoring this border flashpoint is risky. What seems like a local dispute could spiral into a regional conflict if rogue elements exploit the situation. Without a UN-backed verification mission, Sierra Leone's ability to document violations and build international consensus will be constrained. Quantifying the economic losses, the cost of occupation. Beyond sovereignty and security, the economic cost of the Yenga occupation is substantial. A joint economic study commissioned by the Sierra Leone Chamber of Commerce and the Institute for Policy Research and Advocacy, IPRA, in early 2025 estimates that Sierra Leone loses approximately $9 million USD annually from unregulated cross-border mining in the Makona Basin. Closure of local markets has reduced trade volumes in Calahun district by 38%. The agricultural sector in Sokoma and Koindu has lost over 70% of arable wetland use, particularly in rice and cassava farming. Tax revenues from Yenga's economic zone, estimated at 1.2 million year before the dispute reignited, have fallen to zero. The report also indicates that informal trade networks, now dominated by Guinean intermediaries, have distorted local prices, especially for staple goods like palm oil and smoked fish, causing inflation spikes in eastern Sierra Leone. If this situation continues, economic marginalization of the region could fuel youth radicalization or recruitment into illicit smuggling rings, erode trust in state authority, widen regional inequalities which are already pronounced in Sierra Leone's post-war recovery. Diplomatic voices, regional leaders. Weigh in. Several prominent West African diplomats and civil society leaders have issued strong public statements since the April incursion. Liberia's Perspective Liberia, which shares a border with both Sierra Leone and Guinea, has urged calm and dialogue. President Joseph Boakai recently called on ECOWAS to use the Yenga crisis as an opportunity to revive regional diplomacy rooted in solidarity, not militarism. Liberia's historical role as a buffer state in West African diplomacy puts it in a position to act as a quiet mediator, though it lacks formal leverage. Ghana's role? Ghana's President John Mahama, seen as a senior statesman in ECOWAS, has informally expressed concern, especially given Ghana's chairmanship of several regional security initiatives. Ghana's Ministry of Foreign Affairs is reportedly exploring the deployment of an independent ECOWAS border observation team, according to a diplomatic source in Accra. Senegal and Nigeria. While Nigeria has been cautious in public, internal memos from Nigeria's foreign ministry show that Abuja sees the Yenga dispute as a litmus test for West Africa's capacity to uphold post-colonial borders. Senegal, a strong voice in the African Union, has advocated for ICJ arbitration, arguing that regional institutions lack the teeth to compel rogue actors. Civil society mobilization, grassroots pressure builds. In Sierra Leone, grassroots organizations and civil society networks are increasingly vocal. Groups like Border Peace Watch, Kailahun Women for Justice, and the Sierra Leone Bar Association are leading a Yatu Yenga Ours campaign across social media and community radio. Their demands include transparency in all government communications on the crisis, monthly community briefings by the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Defense, inclusion of traditional chiefs and border elders in peace dialogues, long-term plans to rehabilitate displaced villages and invest in economic recovery once Yenga is secured. Chief Moriba Duwai of Upper Bambara Chiefdom told local media, "We don't want war, but we want truth. We've seen 20 years of waiting. This time, we demand a timeline for resolution, not just promises." The hidden hands, resource exploitation, and foreign interests in Yenga. While the territorial dispute between Sierra Leone and Guinea is framed as a matter of national sovereignty, emerging reports suggest that natural resource exploitation, backed by transnational commercial interests, may be quietly fueling the conflict. Yenga and its surrounding terrain are part of the Makona River mineral corridor, a zone rich in alluvial diamonds, gold, and other valuable resources. Foreign mining cartels and informal networks, investigative journalists working with the West African Natural Resource Transparency Initiative, WAN-RTI, have gathered preliminary evidence indicating that unlicensed mining operations, many of them with ties to foreign intermediaries from the United Arab Emirates, China, and Lebanon, are active in the contested zone. These networks reportedly operate through Guinean military protection, often paying bribes or offering revenue-sharing agreements to local commanders in exchange for non-interference in illicit extraction. WAN-RT's May 2025 briefing note states, "The persistence of Guinean military presence in Yenga may not be driven solely by border politics, but also by an entrenched network of illicit resource deals operating with the complicity of rogue officials." Sources from Sierra Leone's Anti-Corruption Commission, ACC, and Ministry of Mines and Mineral Resources have corroborated that conflict diamonds continue to leave the Yenga corridor through unofficial channels, bypassing the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme, KPCS, legal instruments, and African territorial integrity. As Sierra Leone signals its willingness to escalate the dispute to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, it will likely lean on key international legal doctrines to reinforce its territorial claim. 1. Uti possidetis juris. This principle, enshrined in African Union norms, asserts that colonial borders should remain inviolable post-independence. Yenga was clearly located within British Sierra Leone, as per 1908 British-French delimitation maps. 2. Non-acquisition of territory by force. Under Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, the use of force to acquire territory is prohibited. Guinea's military presence in Yenga, decades after hostilities ended, would likely be considered unlawful occupation under this provision. 3. African Union Constitutive Act, Article 4b. The AU explicitly upholds the principle of respect for borders existing on achievement of independence, reinforcing Sierra Leone's legal foundation. However, enforcement remains the biggest challenge. Even if the ICJ rules in Sierra Leone's favor, much like it did for Cameroon in the Bakassi Peninsula case, implementation will depend on political will from Guinea's transitional authorities, pressure and follow-up from ECOWAS and the AU, deployment of neutral peacekeepers or observers to ensure compliance. Mapping Africa's other border flashpoints, a continent of disputed frontiers. The Yenga conflict is emblematic of a broader problem in Africa. Post-colonial borders remain fragile and contested, often exacerbated by natural resources, ethnic ties, and political instability. Here are a few examples that echo the Yenga scenario. Conflict zone countries involved, resource driver status, Abyei region, Sudan, and South Sudan Oil Joint Administration, volatile Bakassi Peninsula, Nigeria, and Cameroon oil and fisheries resolved via ICJ still tense, Ilemi Triangle, Kenya, and South Sudan pasture, water unresolved, Alpha Shaga Triangle, Ethiopia, and Sudan, fertile land. Periodic clashes, Lake Malawi dispute, Malawi and Tanzania oil exploration, ongoing diplomatic dialogue, Yenga, Makona Corridor, Sierra Leone and Guinea diamonds, gold farmland, active tension, unresolved. The key pattern in most cases is that natural resources combined with weak enforcement of historical treaties often lead to recurring border crises. Yenga, therefore, is not just a bilateral concern. It is a warning about the fragility of African regional peace in the absence of strong multilateral conflict resolution frameworks. The human security dilemma, a generation caught in limbo. In Sokoma, Koindu, and the broader Kailahun district, thousands of civilians remain displaced. An assessment by Save the Children and the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, revealed disturbing trends. Over 1,400 school-aged children are out of school due to closure of facilities and security concerns. Health facilities in border areas are either non-functional or understocked, with rising cases of malaria, cholera, and trauma injuries. Food insecurity has worsened due to blocked access to swampland farms, leading to emergency level hunger among 23% of the population surveyed. Despite a modest response from the National Disaster Management Agency, NDMA, and Sierra Leone Red Cross, the gap remains wide. Donor fatigue worsened by multiple global crises, Sudan, Gaza, Ukraine, has limited international humanitarian funding for what is perceived as a low-intensity dispute. Children like Mariatu Fomba, age 12, now live in makeshift shelters in Koindu with no access to education or proper nutrition. Her story reflects a broader reality, a generation growing up under the shadow of unfinished wars and unhealed wounds. The media war, narratives, nationalism, and disinformation. Both Guinea and Sierra Leone have engaged in media framing to shape public opinion and international sympathy. Sierra Leonean messaging emphasizes sovereignty and victimhood, uses historical maps and legal arguments, promotes the hashtag Yenga on Twitter, X, and Facebook, deploys community radio stations in Kailahun to counter fear and encourage calm. Guinean counter-narrative frames Yenga as Guinea's security buffer zone, claiming continued threats from former rebel fighters, highlights alleged infiltration from Sierra Leone into Guinean territory, censors domestic media from reporting critically on the issue. Disinformation campaigns have emerged on social media platforms with doctored maps, edited videos, and false casualty reports being circulated to stir nationalist sentiment. Facebook, TikTok, and WhatsApp have been particularly targeted, prompting Sierra Leone's Cybersecurity and Crime Unit to begin monitoring hate speech and fake news related to the conflict. Pathways to peace, preventing a protracted border crisis. As tensions remain high around the Yenga corridor, the question now facing the region is not whether the dispute is dangerous, but how and when it can be de-escalated without compromising Sierra Leone's sovereignty or Guinea's security posture. Given the high risk of militarization and economic degradation, a multi-layered diplomatic, security, and developmental response is urgently required. Diplomatic off-ramps, options on the table. 1. Reviving the Guinea-Sierra Leone Joint Border Commission, originally designed to address border demarcation issues and reduce friction, this bilateral mechanism has been dormant for years. Resuscitating it under ECOWAS supervision could provide a neutral platform for structured dialogue and verification missions. 2. Third-party mediation through the African Union Panel of the WISE. The AU's conflict prevention body has historically been underutilized, but could deploy respected African statespersons, such as former presidents or legal experts, to mediate the dispute without the bureaucratic delays of the ICJ process. 3. Establishing a joint border development zone to address mutual economic interests and diffuse military tensions. Both countries could be encouraged to pilot a cross-border development zone around Yenga, with shared mining regulation, environmental protections, and taxation oversight, modeled on the Makona River Union economic framework. 4. High-level security guarantees. A formal non-aggression pact, backed by ECOWAS, with surveillance drones or neutral peacekeeping monitors, could reassure both parties and limit the risk of an accidental escalation. Military escalation scenarios, a risk assessment. Despite public statements favoring peace, military analysts within ECOWAS and the Institute for Strategic Security Studies, ISSS, have outlined 3 plausible escalation pathways if diplomacy fails. Scenario description, probability, implications, border skirmish, clashes between Sierra Leonean and Guinean patrols, limited casualties, medium heightened tensions, displacement and risk of arms proliferation, occupation expansion. Guinea extends military control further into Sierra Leonean territory. Low moderate diplomatic breakdown, regional condemnation, potential ECOWAS sanctions, proxy militia emergence armed groups, e.g., local vigilantes or rogue ex rebels, enter the vacuum medium destabilization of entire eastern Sierra Leone, increased arms trafficking. To avert such scenarios, Sierra Leone's Ministry of Defense has reportedly updated its strategic border deployment posture, deploying small units for deterrence, not aggression, and coordinating surveillance with intelligence units. Still, both countries remain on heightened military alert. Elections, legitimacy, and the Yenga gambit political observers argue that the Yenga standoff may serve domestic political goals in both countries, particularly as Guinea moves toward promised elections under the junta-led transitional roadmap. In Guinea, nationalism as a political tool. Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya's transitional government is under increasing pressure from the Guinean opposition demanding a return to civilian rule, ECOWAS deadlines for constitutional transition, a struggling economy, and widespread public disillusionment. By holding on to Yenga, the junta is invoking a nationalist narrative, portraying itself as a protector of Guinean sovereignty, a tactic observed in other authoritarian contexts. In Sierra Leone, a diplomatic test for Bio's administration, President Julius Maada Bio, already facing economic headwinds, inflation, and political opposition after the controversial 2023 elections, is under public pressure to demonstrate strength. Failure to secure Yenga diplomatically could be seen as a national embarrassment, especially after public reassurances of maximum pressure on Guinea. Political columnist Ismail Sese, writing in the Freetown Daily Monitor, notes, Yenga has become the crucible in which both governments are testing their legitimacy, not just to foreign observers, but to their own restless populations. The Mono River Union, dormant, divided, or defunct, once heralded as a beacon of regional cooperation, the Mono River Union, MRU, comprised of Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia, and Côte d'Ivoire, has been largely absent from efforts to mediate the Yenga dispute. Formed in 1973 to promote regional economic integration, peace, and shared development, the MRU has suffered from institutional weakness, lack of enforcement mechanisms, member states shifting political allegiances. The current MRU Secretary General, Ambassador Medina Wessa, has called for quiet diplomacy and reconvening a special session to address the border crisis. However, critics say the MRU has become largely symbolic and needs reform and funding to play any meaningful role in regional stability. International partners, where do they stand? So far, international actors have issued general appeals for calm, but stopped short of concrete action. Partner position, action taken United Nations. Supports territorial integrity, awaiting fact-finding brief, no on-ground presence yet. United States urged restraint, called for ECOWAS-led solution, state depth. Memo, no mediation offer yet. United Kingdom emphasized rule-based resolution mechanisms, reiterated support for ICJ path. China maintained silence publicly, rumored links to mining actors, strategic ambiguity. France called for respect of colonial boundaries, engaged bilaterally with Guinea civil society watchdogs, are now urging the European Union, African Development Bank, and World Bank to consider linking economic cooperation to conflict de-escalation benchmarks, particularly as infrastructure and trade projects are stalled due to insecurity along the Sierra Leone-Guinea corridor. Voices beyond borders, diaspora, youth movements, and the regional civil society surge. While government officials and international organizations dominate the headlines, a new wave of activism is emerging from diaspora communities and youth led regional movements, shaping the narrative and injecting fresh urgency into the Yenga debate. The diaspora's digital diplomacy. Sierra Leoneans in the diaspora, particularly those based in the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, have launched coordinated digital campaigns under hashtags such as Yenga is Sierra Leone, Defend Our Land, and Makona Matters. These campaigns serve to pressure international media outlets to cover the conflict more prominently, encourage legal professionals abroad to provide pro bono support for a potential ICJ case, mobilize fundraising efforts to support displaced communities in Kailahun district. Organizations like the Sierra Leone Diaspora Network, Concerned Guineans for Peace, and Africans for Border Justice, ABJ, have issued joint solidarity statements urging their respective governments and international partners to act. One of the leading diaspora voices, Dr. Fatmata Kamara, a Sierra Leonean American scholar based at Georgetown University, told the Bold African Voice, Yenga is not just about a boundary, it is about justice, memory, and the dignity of post-war reconstruction. Our people bled to reclaim peace, and we will not remain silent as that peace is chipped away, inch by inch. Youth voices in Sierra Leone and Guinea. In Sierra Leone, university student unions, rural youth organizations, and secondary school debate clubs have incorporated the Yenga issue into their platforms. Many young people see the conflict as a symbol of their country's fragile sovereignty, linking it to broader frustrations around corruption, unemployment, and unfulfilled post-war development promises. Meanwhile, in Guinea, some youth groups, though wary of the junta, have also begun questioning the strategic logic behind continued occupation of foreign land, especially as poverty and repression persist at home. An anonymous member of the Front des étudiants guinéens pour la transition démocratique, FEGTD, shared, Our futures lie in democratic reform, not in occupying swamps and diamonds. We want education, jobs, and freedom, not another border war. These youth movements may prove to be bridge builders for peace, offering a platform for dialogue that sidesteps the political toxicity of state to state negotiations. Legal lessons from the Bakassi Peninsula dispute. The Bakassi Peninsula dispute between Nigeria and Cameroon is often cited as a model of peaceful dispute resolution via the International Court of Justice, ICJ. After the ICJ ruled in favor of Cameroon in 2002, the two nations agreed to a phased withdrawal and transfer of administration under the Green Tree Agreement 2006, monitored by the United Nations. Relevance for Yenga lesson from Bakassi applicability to Yenga use of historical colonial boundaries strengthens Sierra Leone's claim under uti possidetis, juris phased military withdrawal, could be modeled in a future ECOWAS or AU-backed exit plan for Guinean troops. Third-party monitoring recommends deployment of neutral monitors to avoid sudden reoccupation compensation mechanisms. A mechanism for transitional economic arrangements, e.g. shared resource rights, may apply. However, unlike Nigeria, which had a functioning democratic government and high international engagement, Guinea is under military rule, making compliance more uncertain. Moreover, ECOWAS lacks the enforcement strength the UN brought to Bakassi through its observer missions. Still, a regionally backed ICJ case, combined with incremental bilateral de-escalation and technical demarcation via the African Union Border Program, AUBP, remains one of the most viable long-term solutions. Comparative insights, how ASEAN and the EU handle border disputes. Looking outside Africa, regional bodies like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the European Union, EU, provide contrasting but instructive models for handling intra-regional border conflicts. ASEAN approach, informal consensus, economic interdependence. ASEAN countries prioritize non-interference and consensus, often using quiet diplomacy to manage disputes like the Thailand-Cambodia Priya Vihir temple conflict. Regional economic dependency creates a disincentive for escalation. Lesson for West Africa: foster cross-border infrastructure projects and shared resource zones to create a peace dividend. EU approach: supranational legal structures. EU member states rely on supranational judicial mechanisms, e.g., European Court of Justice, and treaty enforcement, with penalties for non-compliance. Historical disputes, e.g., Spain-Gibraltar, Slovenia-Croatia, are addressed within formal rule of law frameworks. Lesson for ECOWAS and the AU: develop binding regional legal bodies capable of adjudicating disputes and enforcing rulings beyond voluntary compliance. Toward post-conflict recovery, Yenga as a future growth zone. If the dispute is resolved peacefully and Guinean troops withdraw, Yenga has the potential to become a flagship post-conflict development zone. Strategic planning documents from Sierra Leone's Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, MOPED, propose establishment of a special agro-mineral economic corridor along the Makona River, construction of a border technical institute to boost cross-border vocational training, rehabilitation of the Koindu-Yenga-Kisidugu trade route to revive local commerce, integration of women-led cooperatives and youth entrepreneurship programs to build resilience. In consultation with international development partners, including the African Development Bank and IFAD, Sierra Leone has begun drafting a Yenga resettlement and livelihood restoration framework contingent on a peaceful outcome. Leaked diplomatic cables: what West African leaders are saying behind closed doors. Confidential diplomatic cables reviewed by the Bold African Voice, shared by regional sources with access to ECOWAS foreign ministries, offer insight into the private concerns, calculations, and hesitations of West African leaders surrounding the Yenga conflict. Key revelations from the diplomatic memos. Nigeria. Vice President Kashim Shettima is reportedly deeply concerned that continued Guinean intransigence may undermine ECOWAS legitimacy, especially after the bloc's failed mediation in Niger and Guinea-Bissau. Nigeria is pushing for a quiet shuttle diplomacy effort, but is unwilling to publicly confront Guinea due to broader regional security cooperation concerns. Ghana. Foreign Minister Shirley Ayorkor Botchway has recommended that ECOWAS act preemptively to avoid further embarrassment, suggesting the formation of an emergency sub-regional task force to verify territorial boundaries and prevent escalation. Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire. Both countries have voiced frustration with the growing pattern of border adventurism by military-led governments and are advocating for the suspension of development aid to non-compliant states as a deterrent. Liberia. President Joseph Boakai is promoting a border peace initiative modeled after Liberia's post-Civil War community reintegration programs. He has offered Monrovia as a neutral venue for direct talks between Freetown and Conakry. These cables reveal a regional consensus. Guinea's continued military posture in Yenga threatens not just Sierra Leonean sovereignty, but regional cohesion. Yet, the same documents highlight fears of triggering a wider confrontation, a dilemma at the heart of ECOWAS diplomatic paralysis. Strategic recommendations: preventing future border crises in Africa. To break the cycle of disputed boundaries, turning into protracted political and humanitarian crises, the Bold African Voice presents 5 policy recommendations for African leaders and continental institutions. 1. Codify and digitize colonial-era boundary records. The AU and member states must invest in a centralized digital repository of colonial-era boundary treaties, maps, and arbitration decisions accessible to legal teams, policymakers, and mediators across the continent. 2. Strengthen AU border governance architecture. The African Union Border Program, AUBP, must be upgraded with funding, personnel, and political backing to carry out technical demarcations, community consultations, and mediation on a proactive basis, not just when crises erupt. 3. Establish an ECOWAS border crisis early warning system. Much like its early warning and response network, ECOWARN, for internal conflict, ECOWAS should establish a border stability index that flags tensions based on troop movement, economic disruptions, and media narratives. 4. Create a contingent peacekeeping force for border hotspots. The African Standby Force, ASF, or ECOWAS regional brigades should be mandated to deploy light monitoring teams at contested border zones upon the request of member states, preventing unilateral military advances and protecting civilians. 5. Institutionalize cross-border trade zones and joint resource management. Many African borders are artificially drawn across communities that share cultural, linguistic, and economic ties. Peaceful coexistence and development can be strengthened by joint economic governance models, including shared mining rights, customs unions, and conflict-sensitive development plans. Final reflections, advice to African leaders. The Yenga crisis is a stark reminder that the ghosts of colonial-era boundaries still haunt Africa, not just as lines on a map, but as wounds in the lives of real people. While diplomacy has delayed violence, it has not delivered justice. Regional and continental leaders must now choose between performative engagement and transformative action. To the leaders of Africa, guard borders with dialogue, not domination. Value people over territory. Replace short-term tactical gains with long-term regional stability. Use the Yenga conflict as a watershed moment to reform border governance across the continent. Summary of key messages. The Guinea-Sierra Leone dispute over Yenga is a multi-decade border conflict rooted in the aftermath of Sierra Leone's civil war and fueled by natural resource interests, weak enforcement of agreements, and militarized governance. The April 2025 incursion by Guinean troops has reignited tensions, displaced civilians, and exposed both the limits of regional diplomacy and the fragility of international legal mechanisms. Diaspora communities, youth movements, and civil society are playing a crucial role in reframing the debate, demanding accountability and sustainable peace. Lessons from the Bakassi Peninsula, Nigeria, Cameroon, as well as comparative models from ASEAN and the European Union, offer pathways for resolution through legal adjudication, shared resource governance, and cross-border cooperation. African leaders and institutions must move beyond reactive diplomacy and develop proactive, technical, and community-centered border governance strategies to prevent future crises. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV. This is more than a dispute over land. It's a test of Africa's commitment to peace, justice, and unity. As the people of Yenga wait for a lasting resolution, the world must pay attention, and African leaders must act. If you found this content insightful, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe to join us as we tell Africa's stories with boldness and truth. Until next time, keep your voice bold and your vision clear.